following program is intended for mature audiences.
Rudy's revelation.
You can't handle the truth.
Hey everybody, welcome to today's episode. It is Tuesday, July 15th. All right, so inflation has ticked up from 2.3 to 2.7. Some say more than expected. Some say it was expected. People are claiming it's because of tariffs, but we're going to look at why that isn't necessarily the case. But also going to talk about the grand conspiracy. What is the grand conspiracy? The grand conspiracy is not what Kash Patel says it is, or what Ron Johnson says it is. So we're going to talk about the actual grand conspiracy and what they're calling the grand conspiracy, which isn't that grand, but it certainly is a conspiracy. You got to pull it out at the roots. So we're going to try to do that. So let's get into the news for today, July 15th. We're going to start with the Wall Street Journal. Inflation hit 2.7 in June, in line with expectations. Core inflation, excluding volatile food and energy prices, was 2.9. Well, that certainly is interesting. I didn't see that. We're going to get into that right now. Did I put on all the graphs? So this is right from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. 12-month percentage change consumer price index. That's a CPI. That's what they announced today. Selected categories. June 2025. Not seasonally adjusted. All items, and this is year over year, so all items are slightly above 2. Food is up a little bit more than that. And all items, less food and energy, is actually below that. And energy is actually negative. So I got a couple of concerns here. And, well, I need to adjust this, the graph here. So bear with me. Because I have a couple other charts that I didn't get in here. So let me do that first. So these are also charts from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And I'm going to want to try to explain why this all doesn't really seem to make sense. Now, everybody was predicting that the tariffs were going to cause inflation, but tariffs are import taxes put on goods that aren't made domestically. So I got a couple of questions here, and I'm not an economist by any means, but I don't believe that tariffs are going to raise prices or affect inflation necessarily. And the reason I'm going to suggest this is what I'm going to look at right now. So if you look at this chart here, June, it shows prices up basically across the board, except for new vehicles and used cars are down, which were actually during Biden's inflation, one of the things that rose most predominantly was the cost of new vehicles. Now, if you're tariffing, now we talked about this before, the auto industry was concerned because you're tariffing parts that are going to go into cars. And lots of cars are produced internationally. Why didn't tariff affect cars? Now, the Wall Street Journal, but many economists are saying that food and energy is what drove the inflation. Well, most energy is produced domestically, and so is most food, particularly this time of year. In the winter, it's different. Now, you could say, oh, but hey, wait, what about avocado? Okay. All right. Avocado is an outlier. And I'm not saying that there isn't food that isn't produced internationally, but a lot of food that you consume is produced domestically. Chicken, we don't import chicken. We don't import beef for the most part. I'm not saying that we don't. I mean, Kobe beef. People eat Brazilian beef, what have you. And most fruits and vegetables are not produced internationally. We don't import those things this time of year. So they're saying that the things that we produce mostly domestically are what drove inflation. Well, how could that be because of inflation? Now, I'm not here to explain why fuel prices have gone up. If you looked at the pump, you've seen that that's the case. And this is perplexing, certainly, especially after OPEC announced they're going to increase production. So you can look at the chart in 2025. That inflation was going down significantly. Look at March. Look how much gas went down in March, February. And then it doesn't keep going back, but you could see that this is bucking a trend. Now, why is that? Well, that has a lot to do with what's going on here. So the biggest increases here are electricity. Well, if fuel prices are also up, electricity is up, obviously, and if gasoline, all types, is up. Why is energy up? Is the question. And that would drive all prices up. So we have to try to understand why energy is up. If we produce a lot of energy domestically, we're not buying a lot from Russia, let's say, or other tariffed countries. So why is oil up? Well, let me tell you why oil was up in June, why energy prices went up in June. Remember what happened in June? There was the threat from Iran, right? That's what caused energy prices in the stock exchange and just generally to rise, was the threat of war with Iran. That's my speculation there. So energy prices from a threat of a war with Iran drove up, in my opinion, drove up energy prices. The simple reason being is the fear that Iran would close the Strait of Hormuz and prohibit the Persian Gulf nations from exporting oil. Now, we do import a lot of oil we produce a lot here, but we produce the rest, or we import the rest from those states. But if we looked at energy markets, and I didn't drill this far in, if we looked at energy markets, we would probably see an increase around the world because of what happened in June and the saber rattling of war. And you could see that all the speculation and whatnot was happening then. So that's the driver for me, because as far as we're concerned, that the majority of consumable energy is produced here in America, as is food. So why was all those prices driven up? It was probably because of Iran. Now, you're going to see everybody across the news saying, it's here. See, the tariffs are are causing inflation. Now let's look at a technical note here by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The CPI measures the change in prices paid by consumers for goods and services. CPI reflects spending patterns for each of the two population groups. Urban consumers, urban wage earners, clerical workers. All urban consumer groups represent over 90% of the total U.S. population. So they don't even measure prices in rural areas. So that's something to certainly to keep in mind. Not included in the CPI are spending patterns of people living in rural, non-metropolitan areas, farming families, people in the armed forces, and those in institutions. So there it is. I mean, whether you want to take a closer look at that or not is up to you. All right, let's move on. Let's go to another chart here. June CPI report inflation accelerates at 2.7. Core is at 2.9. Overall 2.7, which is up. But you can look at this if you want, and you could say it's down considerably from where the Biden administration took it. So you could look at the graph. You can look at the graph here and just see that under Biden, it was astronomical compared to where it is now. It's still high. It's not down below 2 where the target is, but it's still high. So, but they want to say it's caused by tariffs. I tend to disagree. Now, China, on the other hand, China's economy grows steadily despite Trump's tariffs. Official figures show modest growth in the second quarter as exports shifted to other countries and Beijing invested in manufacturing and infrastructure. So, now this is a New York Times fluff piece, but let's keep things in perspective here. Now, China has tariffs. China protects their markets. China has huge tariffs. How come China doesn't have inflation if tariffs cause inflation? So what Trump was threatening, and as I said, the tariff war is really directed at China, which there's some things that Trump is doing that's upsetting me, but it's okay. He is the president, and he does what he wants to do, and I don't have a personal connection with Trump, so. But we'll look at this article here by Keith Bradshaw. China's economy grew at a steady pace in the spring, according to official figures, bolstered by domestic investment subsidies in factories and big projects like high-speed rail lines, which we're going to get to later in the program, and a continued flood of exports throughout the world. So they're still exporting throughout the world. So let's get to the numbers. But they were exporting into America as well through other third countries, so they were trying to dodge the tariffs. But let's look at the numbers here. China's economy grew 1.1% over the previous 3 months, the National Bureau of Statistics announced Tuesday. That's a Chinese National Bureau of Statistics, not our BLS. If that pace continues, the economy will expand at an annual rate of 4.1%, only slightly lower than the gross growth in the first 3 months of this year. We've been pumping up China's economy for years. Now, China, the communist Chinese, also manipulate currency, and they do a bunch of other stuff because they know economics is part of the war that they're waging against us. So they protected themselves. First of all, Trump telegraphed that he was going to do tariffs, and so they got out in front of it. And then they also subsidized industries. Now, there's more to talk about. I thought I had that text here. Maybe it's in the Zero Hedge article. China Q2 GDP drops to 5.2 but beats expectations thanks to subsidies and tariff front running, and that's what they call getting ahead of tariffs by shipping out goods before the tariffs take effect. China's GDP grew 5.2% on the year in the second quarter, just fractionally above expectations, as it usually is the case when Beijing reports fake numbers. The National Bureau of Statistics said Tuesday, fueled by front-loaded experts and even more tariffs and a flood of subsidies that supported the manufacturing sector. Oh, here's where it gets juicy. Exports rose 5.8% for the quarter, off slightly the 5.9 growth pace in the first half of the 2025 as the trade war with the U.S. fueled front-loading and export diversion to other countries. The U.S. jacked up tariffs on Chinese goods in April to as high as 145% before temporarily lowering most of them following an agreement a month later. A decline in U.S.-bound shipments was offset by growth in other regions such as Southeast Asia, which China uses as a transshipment hub, and Europe, where dumping of China's EVs is crushing the local automotive industry. The economy withstood pressures, according to the NBS, and is overall stable and improving economic performance. Now, China's power output rose just 0.8% year over year for the January-June period to 4,537.1 kilowatts per hour, and is much more accurate reflection of Chinese actual growth. So there you have it. I mean, there's more, but China fakes the numbers. So we're competing with China, but what is happening, and as what you'll see, is that the grand conspiracy might have a good sounding name, but the grand conspiracy has to do with the powers that be, the elite, whatever you want to call them, having a preference for China and pumping up China's growth and preferring China's political system now that they can fake their economic system. Going back to the story, the data also underscores the perennial imbalance in China's economy that could face further headwinds in the second half of the year. Sluggish domestic demand, which is key, and an excess supply of goods, also noted because they're not shipping out as much now that they have already front-loaded. As noted before, the country remains stuck in its longest streak of deflation in decades, weighing on corporate profits and wage growth. Consumption continued to lag behind other growth drivers, as falling home prices and a weak job market damning consumer spending. If they can't use the American market, which is the perennial consumer that spends even if they don't have any money, if they rely on their domestic spending of their domestic population because they're slaves, they don't really have a lot of money, and they're not like people in the United States that, regardless of the economic situation, people keep spending. The economic outlook for the rest of the year remains challenging. Zhishun Wang, an economist at Capital Economics, with exports set to slow and tailwind from fiscal support on course to fade, growth is likely to slow further during the second half of this year. This is important. Industrial output growth jumped in June from a year earlier, suggesting manufacturers have been rushing to fulfill orders amid May's trade truce with Washington. So a lot of their June growth has to do with the pause put on tariffs in a trade war that we're fighting with the communists who lie, cheat, and steal. And part of this has to do with NVIDIA wins okay to sell AI chip to China again after CEO meets with Trump. Hessing Wang's case proves persuasive, as the U.S. agrees to grant licenses for the H2O chip. Now, we just went through this before, even with Nancy Pelosi saying that they want to limit state-of-the-art chips made in the U.S. and in Taiwan going to our adversary in China. And we're going to get to why this is a problem, because you've heard of the AI race, right? This is the AI chip that NVIDIA makes, is going to China, communist China. We're supposed to be in an AI race with China. And we'll get to some of those details later. Got over 30 headlines to get through today, so let's keep on track in the next hour or so. But we will get to it at the end during the, I usually end with a tech, international and tech segment. So wait a second here. Okay, so we're propping up China's economy while our economy is struggling. And we're supposed to be in an AI race with China, but Trump apparently just agreed to allow NVIDIA, gave them a license to sell AI chip to China, even after, now this is something the Democrats could hop on because it was Pelosi and Democrats who agreed to limit advanced chip making sales to China. We've been doing this over and over and over again with the missile technologies given to the Chinese or given a license for companies to sell to the Chinese by Bill Clinton. And it goes on and on and on. All right, let's get to the grand conspiracy. What is the grand conspiracy? The grand conspiracy is, what I just alluded to, is when the elite, the powers that be, whatever, that are not nationalistic at all, they're internationalists, right? And communism is their preferred, the party politics of communism is their preferred form of government for the masses. It is controlled opposition that after the merchant class's revolution against the monarchies, they wanted to give the peons something to cling on to that supposedly was going to be a better political system than capitalism. But it's not. It's controlled by the capitalists. So, and you see that time and time again. Now, maybe that's why leftists say, well, true communism has never been tried. It's not meant to be tried or meant to work. Because the same people that are capitalists and own their own private companies now would just be party leaders in a communist system. They would still control the companies, but the state would get a portion. But they would be involved in how the state spends its money. Not that much different than what they're doing now. You don't think the industrialists have control about how the state spends the money? And when I say state, I mean the nation state. I don't mean like the 50 states of America. All right. So what the folks are alluding to now is the grand conspiracy had something to do with the fact that the U.S. government or people within the U.S. government that are controlled by big money, big pharma, the elite, powers that be, whatever you want to, capitalist, however you want to say it, the fascism that the left always talks about. Is that the grand conspiracy, fascism? No, that's not the grand conspiracy. So they're going to allude to a domestic nature of the grand conspiracy. But the grand conspiracy, the reason it's grand is because it's bigger than how people lay it out to be. It's not just domestically, rich people in America control the U.S. government, or people within the U.S. government, they control bureaucrats or whatever. Because a lot of people will lead you to believe that it's just the bureaucrats that are working on their own accord and blah, 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 blah. Yeah. But the grand conspiracy, it has no borders. All right. Let's start with Anthony Fauci. The Federalist, Fauci pardon was greenlit by aide with no proof Biden approved it. He didn't. But Biden didn't personally sign Fauci's pardon, and an auto pen managed by his White House staff secretary Stephanie Feldman did. Feldman. And a New York Times piece by Washington reporters Charlie Savage and Tyler Pager shows that there is no proof Biden even knew about Fauci's pardon, or even the specifics of most of the other pardons. Of course not. Corporate leaders love administrators because as long as you have a lot of them, it doesn't matter who's there. I mean, Biden was just a figurehead. He was really never really running the government. The corporations were. And even though their minions on the street were saying, stop fascism, and looking at Trump because of fascism, they never looked at their own leader, who was one of the biggest fascists ever, because he just went to sleep on the beach and let the corporations run things through his minions. Also, the post-millennial Trump blasts Biden over auto pen scandal. He knew nothing about what he was signing. Trump said the use of auto pen is maybe one of the biggest scandals we've had in 50 to 100 years. True. And the Federalist, again, media mocked doubts about Biden's auto pen. A new New York Times report just confirmed it. Now, I got a little bit of a problem here. Now, the problem was in this first article by the Federalist, they talk about Fauci getting pardoned was greenlit by aide, but they don't mention the most important figure in this. Now, when Ron Klain was being pointed at as being the real person in charge of the Biden administration, he quickly skedaddled because he didn't want to get caught up in what he saw already was happening, which was that people were figuring out that Biden wasn't in charge and that all these terrible things that were happening were going to be blamed on somebody, not just Biden, because they were figuring out that Biden wasn't running the government. So he skedaddled. Who did they put in? This guy called Zeist? What was this guy's name? In any case, he was the pandemic czar under Anthony Fauci. Well, in the first article, the Federalist doesn't even mention this guy. But he's mentioned here because the fact of the matter is, the guy that was under Fauci at the NIH was now involved in pardoning Fauci. On his own accord because they were friends? No, that's not why. It's because Fauci is integral to keeping a lid on the cover-up, but also as a conduit into the pharmaceutical industry. All right, let's get to this article. Media mock doubts about Biden auto pen, a new New York Times report just confirmed. Mr. Biden did not individually approve each name for the categorical pardons that applied to large numbers of people he and aides confirmed. Rather than extensive discussion of different possible criteria, signed off on the standards he wanted to be used to determine which convicts would qualify for reduction in sentence, the Times' Charlie Savage and Tyler Pager wrote. Again, this is a lie because he's saying, rather, after extensive discussion, how do they know? According to the people they're supposed to be critical of. Ask Hitler if he really ordered the extermination of the Jews. You know, it's so stupid. Rather, after extensive discussion of different possible criteria, he signed off on the standards he wanted to be used to determine. That's not how pardons work. You have to look at each individual case. Actually, Trump did this with the January 6th because you looked at the criteria Biden used and Trump just applied that to the January 6th people. Small changes to the list kept occurring after Biden signed off. So even in their reporting, they're saying that the minions kept sliding shit in. Rather than ask Mr. Biden to keep signing revised versions, the staff waited and then ran the final version through AutoPen, which they saw as a routine procedure. Oh, okay. So it's routine. Not letting the executive know what you're doing in his name, that's routine. It might have been routine for the Biden administration. Biden also reportedly made a list of high-profile clemency decisions during two meetings, one that occurred on January 18th, the other that occurred on January 19th, but it appeared the final approval for pardons during the January 19th meeting came not from Mr. Biden, but from White House Chief of Staff Jeff Zients. Now, as I just mentioned, Jeff Zients was the pandemic czar, and he was one of the most authoritarian people in the NIH under Fauci. He's one of the people that decided on the 6 feet separation, on staying in your homes, the supposed 2 weeks to flatten the curve type of thing. And that's my problem. If Jeff Zients became the pharmaceutical industry's man on the inside during the latter part of the Biden administration. Now, I can't claim that Ron Klain was in the pocket of pharmaceutical industries. I don't know who he was in the pocket of. According to people that know what's going on, he was the conduit to Obama and Hillary, the DNC, let's say. The DNC, out of office DNC folks. But Jeff Zients is obviously in the pocket of the pharmaceutical industry, so they just dispensed with party politics and let the fascist corporatists take charge. Now, I haven't completely understood what exactly was happening here, but first of all, one thing you have to know about the pharmaceutical industry is they love communism and socialism. And I believe it stems from Brave New World. The Brave New World? Yeah, not 1984, Brave New World, because Brave New World has the soma, the pharmaceuticals that keep you relaxed, and you don't want to have a revolution if you're relaxed, you know what I mean? And so they love communism for that very purpose. The early precursors for the pharmaceutical industry were involved in Britain's drugging of China in the 18th century and in the beginning of the 19th century, getting them all hooked on opium. So there's a method to the madness here that, you know, you're on drugs because you're bipolar or manic or something. How about just not being that? Why don't you meditate? Instead, you're on drugs. So once you're on drugs, not only will you probably never be resistant to the type of government the fascists really want, but also you could be led into action very easily, whether to go out and protest or to shoot up a school or do whatever. All right. More from Zero Hedge. 8 Chinese nationals on student visas charged with computer pop-up scam targeting seniors. They were charged with computer pop-up scams. Doesn't matter. The fact that they're illegal Chinese nationals taking advantage of Americans, that's just part and parcel of what the communists are doing over here. Some of them are targeting the population. Some of them are target industry. Some of them target government. It's not just, they're not just criminals because they're like, hey, because everything that Chinese nationals do on American soil is sanctioned by the Chinese Communist Party. So they're just not here like they can't make any money, whatever. They're here trying to scam. Most of their computer skills are learned in China, or the ways to hack, basically. Basically, this is somewhat of a hacking operation. It's a little more above board. Oh, but the hacking is getting the pop-ups to appear. And this teams up with this headline by PJ Media: Spectre is haunting the Democrats, the specter of communism. Now, what I want to say here first about communism is, as I said, it's controlled opposition. Some people on the right seem to feel that communism organically grew out of, if they even go back as far as the French Revolution, certainly, which they should, because that's really where it started. But I don't want to digress too much. Let's stay on point. Let's start with Marxism. So it became obvious that hating America and the taste for Marxism went with being a Democrat, like arrogance and self-righteousness went with being Barack Obama. The best and the brightest among young Democrats are all avowed socialists. The party would have chosen a socialist, Bernie Sanders, as its candidate for president in 2016, which they should have, and likely also in 2020 if the party top dogs hadn't stepped in and arranged for the candidacy of someone else who was at least outwardly mainstream. No. You see, you could be a socialist, but you have to be friendly to corporatism. You see, corporations function in communism. They don't like in communist China, they don't take over the whole company. The state, just by law, has to own 51% controlling share of the company. So they effectively control the company, but they don't own the whole thing. So what they're afraid of real socialists like Bernie Sanders, is that he wants the government to take over, nationalize all corporations, and just cut out the investors, the investor class, the elite. And not all people that invest are elite. That's not what I'm going to. So in any case, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez maintains that what she has in mind isn't the bad old socialism of the Soviet Union, communist China, Pol Pot's democratic Kampuchea, and the rest, but a type involving more unicorns and moonbeams. So when millennials talk about concepts like democratic socialism, we're not talking about these kinds of Red Scare boogeyman. It's not Red Scare boogeyman. We're talking about countries and systems that already exist that have been proven to be successful in the modern world. I know you've already jumped ahead, and you should have, because we're talking about single-payer healthcare that has already been successful in many different models, from Finland to Canada to the UK. It's not successful. If you want to do anything you can to get healthy or get fixed, these countries won't do it, because you can't have any treatment you want. You get to stand in line, and then it's rationed care. And I'm for a monicum of healthcare that's free. Everybody should get healthcare. But if you want a new titanium hip, you're out of luck. We're not going to have expensive surgeries and expensive mechanical hearts or whatever, or bionics, for people that can't afford it. But if you want to get antibiotics and see a doctor, or if you broke your leg and want to get your leg set, yeah, all that should be free. Foreign Policy pointed out in 2021 that Nordic countries are often used internationally to prove that socialism works. They're not socialist. It's true that social democratic parties are enjoying successes in this part of the world. That's debatable. However, it's not the kind of success that AOC would want to encourage. Today, Nordic social democrats have adopted, because of their failed policies, they've adopted stricter immigration policies, tightened eligibility requirements for welfare benefit systems because of the migrants, and a tougher stance on crime because of the migrants. Even Bernie Sanders wasn't for open borders because it hurts the domestic population. And, as I've always said, is that the problem with immigration is the cost. Because if you have a social safety net, you can't lock out people, right? I mean, you can't. So if you're going to let people in, you got to, give them a hand up. The point is, don't let people in. Can't afford it. All right, more news from the New York Post. Former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett denies conspiracy theories linking Jeffrey Epstein to Mossad. I'm going to get into this article in just a second. You might have watched Tucker Carlson when he was at the Turning Point SAS event. I just watched the whole speech this morning. I still like Tucker, but he's throwing around these accusations that Jeffrey Epstein was tied to Mossad. So a former prime minister is going to tell us that it's a conspiracy to link anybody to the intelligence agencies. I mean, come on. All the intelligence agencies and the people around the intelligence agencies, all they do is lie. So you can't take anything they say at face value. In any case, she said, vicious wave of slander and lies against the Jewish state. No, against Mossad and Jeffrey Epstein. 100% certain that the powerful spy agency didn't work with Epstein, who was found dead in his Manhattan jail cell 2019. Yeah, I'm not saying that he worked directly with Mossad. I mean, but that's the thing is, didn't work with Epstein. And she says later, as a former Israeli prime minister with Mossad having reported directly to me, I could say 100% certainty the accusation that Jeffrey Epstein somehow worked. Look at the phrasing here. Worked for Israel or the Mossad running a blackmail ring is categorically untrue, totally false. Not saying that he worked for Mossad or worked for Israel. That's not the way intelligence works. You're an asset. Now, what does that mean? You could always deny. It depends what your definition of is. He probably didn't work for Mossad he was in the United States. It's more than likely he was working for the CIA. And I don't mean that he was a card-carrying agent. I worked for the CIA. That he was probably an asset. He doesn't report to Langley every day or whatever. He goes, we want, and like I said, the elite, the corporate elite, bankers, CEOs, and it's not even the CEOs as much as his board members. And the people that serve on the board aren't always the people that are invested in the company. A lot of times, the people that are invested in the company will hire a proxy to sit in on board meetings, then report directly back to them. So, in any case, Epstein worked for the elite. You know who else works for the elite? The intelligence agencies. So, what Epstein was doing was he was working for the elite by running a underage brothel of sorts, as well as doing scientific studies that they couldn't get approved in a university or even through the federal government or even through DARPA. So, but as the elite go, is you compromise each other. It's just like Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden knew he was compromised. That's why he filmed himself having sex with underage girls and smoking crack. He goes, I'm compromised. Happy to be compromised, because that's what they do. You want to get in the inner circle, you have to be compromised. So if you ever go outside a circle or relay secrets to the press, all of a sudden you'll be ruined. Speaking of which, BJ Media, Jeffrey Epstein accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell is ready to testify. I'm sure she is. Despite rumors, Ghislaine Maxwell was never offered any kind of plea deal. She would be more than happy to sit before Congress and tell her story. I bet she would. What do you think she would say? The only way I would ever say that was okay is if her little black book was unsealed. I don't want her sitting in front of Congress and going, yeah, I procured women for sex, but it was just with Jeffrey Epstein. Nobody else. Not any royal family members, not any corporate CEOs, not Bill Gates, not any Israeli prime ministers. I mean, come on. The evidence surrounding her trial needs to be unsealed. She remains the only person to be jailed in connection with Jeffrey Epstein. And she would welcome the chance to tell the American public the truth. The truth, really. So their intelligence assets, they're running in intelligence circles. So her father was definitely with Mossad. But they're going to tell the truth. So the only person ever jailed for Epstein's monstrous crimes, and the government can't be bothered to ask who else was involved. Indeed. Who else was involved? Well, like I said, corporate elite, intelligence agencies, nation-state governments. Then the powers of the nation-state governments, police, army, military. Then the other professional sector, not corporate. Then the people. That's how it works. So if you think and that's the problem with being on the left. Even when I was a liberal, I was like, no. You're getting the government to rein in corporations. Corporations are above the government. So you're never going to get the government to rein in corporations unless you have someone like Donald Trump in there who's willing to do it. The problem is with Trump, he's buddies with all these business people. He's not going to clamp down. I say revoke all corporate charters and then prove, like it would constitutionally, prove that you're helping the people of America. More news from Just the News. Rand Paul announces he will reissue his criminal referral of Dr. Fauci to the Justice Department. Now, he recently talked about that. I should have brought up this article against that. And we have to understand something here about Rand Paul. I spoke about him yesterday talking about the assassination on Butler. I love Rand Paul, a great guy. He announced he's going to reissue his criminal referral of Dr. Fauci to the Justice Department. Good, he should. And we have all the testimony about his preemptive pardon that can be taken away. So maybe that will happen. Josh Hawley urges DHS Secretary Noem to declassify all Trump Butler rally assassination attempt documents. Senator calls for full transparency as whistleblowers reveal security failures in first attempt of Donald Trump's life. Right. Couldn't find it in the news today, but I read the reports yesterday, or I think it was Sunday. Was it Sunday? It was yesterday. Yesterday, after I had my report, the FBI has cracked the encrypted codes on Thomas Crook's phone. Read the report, and now it's gone. So again, people are getting out in front of it, and so there are two things going on here. I hope I have them in order. No, I don't. Where's that? I just have to get these two things in order because sometimes I don't. When I'm putting it all together, I run into problems. All right, so Josh Hawley urges DHA secretary to declassify all Butler rally assassination attempt documents. The occasion marks a deeply troubling chapter in our nation's history and serves as a reminder. I urge you to take the necessary steps to declassify all documents within the Department of Homeland Security related to the events of July 13th, the assassination attempt at Butler. Because, and this is from today, and the next article is from today also, because of what we heard yesterday was the FBI, right after I reported how hard is it, oh no, we can't crack the encrypted things on the app that Thomas Crook had on his phone. And right after I reported how absurd that is, a year after, all of a sudden they come out and go, no, we did it. And then everybody was like, what? And now they had to pull back on it. So also Judicial Watch, which has been very effective, as I said before, is the whole reason they put out that stupid memo is recalling all the evidence from Epstein is because Judicial Watch filed an FOI suit to find out all the information. What are they doing? They're doing it again. Judicial Watch sues Justice Department for records on Trump's Butler, Pennsylvania would-be assassination or would-be assassin Thomas Crooks. All records of communication in any form, including but not limited to emails, text messages, encrypted app communications, and voice recordings between FBI officials and or FBI sources, and maybe Crooks himself, contractors and assets on the one hand and Thomas Crooks on the other hand. Very specific. This is important because of what they said. Everybody know now. People don't know that he went to the shooting range nearest house, which apparently is frequented also by Department of Homeland Security personnel. And he went there 40 times. And he began his encrypted texts the same time he bought the rifle from his father. And we still don't have a definitive answer of whether it had a scope on the rifle or not. When I saw the body cam footage, I didn't see a scope on the rifle. So, I mean, whatever. But Finton put together the FOI correctly and says encrypted app communications between FBI officials, FBI sources, and Thomas Crooks on the other. That in itself is damning. All right, let's move on to the grand conspiracy, because this is all part of it. If you didn't know, this is all part of it, because what they're trying to do is they're using conspiracy as the bait for the base. And they're dangling it over here, and then they're dangling it over there, and they're trying to, hey, look at Epstein. Hey, look at this. Hey, look at that. Meanwhile, stalling all and stonewalling and, getting the base excited, but then when it comes to release the information, you don't get shit. But the conspiracy obviously is that the United States federal government or agents or assets of that entity were involved in the assassination attempt of Thomas Crook, okay, including local snipers. So you have to understand it's not just the federal government. And we don't know who these local snipers are. This one guy came out and said, I disabled Crooks' weapon. I shot at him and it hit his rifle, but he didn't get injured by that, but it stopped the shooting. And he said he was shooting from the middle of the field, but there's no evidence that anybody shot from the middle of the crowded field or where there were other There were thousands of witnesses. No one ever said they saw some of the local snipers who were dressed in multicam shooting up at that roof. All right, back to story. Ron Johnson calls for accountability amid FBI opening a grand conspiracy probe of weaponization into what? I felt these people were criminals for many years now, Johnson said. I mean, the fact that they knew this, the whole Russiagate was a conspiracy hatched by Hillary Clinton campaign back in 2016. President Obama was briefed on that. I mean, they all knew. But this is almost old news. What, the federal government knew? You know, and Hillary Clinton had that illegal email server, which was actually an electronic dead drop where she would put classified information for hackers of other countries to go get, and then miraculously days or weeks after, the Clinton Foundation would receive tens of millions of dollars. Johnson went on to say they put America through unbelievable, really historic political turmoil, knowing that the entire narrative was completely false. All right, we've got to move a little more quickly now. Secret Service's most egregious failures revealed in damning reports on Trump's attempted assassination. We know all this. We know the problem is the sniper didn't take the shot until the guy got prone again after running across the roof with a rifle, got prone again, set in, and fired 8 shots, supposedly. We never got confirmation. We never got ballistics. We never got the amount of rounds left in the magazine. If it's a 30-round magazine, well, I'm sure it was full. If he fired 8 shots, it would be 22 left, right? We don't know. We don't know any information because there's no trial. So I'm not going to go through this. Chuck Grassley and Rand Paul outlined inexcusable negligence. It's a conspiracy. You're investigating a grand conspiracy, but you're not getting grand enough. Russiagate docs. This is just the news. Russiagate docs Patel found after Comey FBI locked the key may aid grand conspiracy requirements. I'm not going to get into this too much except for the fact that, because I want to stay within an hour here, we're going to go over, is that Comey put the shit there. Is it a Trojan horse? Is it false information? He just discovered it. It was supposed to be hidden. Why didn't he destroy it if it's supposed to be hidden? This whole grand conspiracy investigation, they have to look into the grand conspiracy and not just domestic intelligence officials playing cat and mouse with information. And then they talk about Special Counsel John Durham's final report, and then Crossfire Hurricane, and oh yeah, it was very important. It is very important, and I'm not saying we shouldn't pursue this, but I don't want you to label it a grand conspiracy because the grand conspiracy is global, and unless you attach this to the global conspiracy, which you could, because the rich elite are internationalists who run multinational corporations, and so blah, blah, blah. Well, that was all initiated by John Ratcliffe, the president's CIA director, which is good. That Brennan, Comey, and James Clapper excessively involved in drafting the acceptance, of course. And even though it was rejected by underlings, they went with it anyway. Breaking news, Supreme Court will allow mass layoffs at the Education Department. So they're going to be laying off 1,400 employees. And guess who dissented? We know who. Just the News reporting. Trump says Education Secretary McMahon will continue to gut department following SCOTUS victory. What did he say? The Supreme Court has handed a major victory to parents and students across the country by declaring the Trump administration. They proceed on returning the functions of the Department of Education back to the states. Now, with this great Supreme Court decision, our Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, may begin this very important process. As long as they're channeling funds that have been appropriated, that's fine. But the power of the executive has the right to lay people off. And eventually, since the Department of Education was created for the most part by executive action, don't forget, all this, the Congress has to make a lot of these rescissions permanent. Wall Street Journal, new ICE policy blocks detained migrants from seeking bond. Thank God. Policy shift will apply to all immigrants who cross the U.S. border illegally. In other words, you can't get out on bond and then disappear back into the country. If you're being held for illegally entering the country, you're held permanently and then deported. Because by law, if you're here illegally, there's only one avenue. You get deported. You don't get in front of a judge and be able to say, hey, I'm here, but I'm a good citizen. I'm a good citizen. I'm a good resident. I pay my taxes, blah, blah, blah. You don't get to do that. It's asylum. Yeah, okay. No. Just the news, ICE accuses Democratic congressman of doxing an agent who was injured by rocks. If you didn't hear about this, last week when ICE raided the marijuana farm, one of these Democratic representatives of California, Salud Karjabal, said, oh, it was so awful, it was awful. But Karjabal had the right as a member of Congress to oversee federal operations, but was denied entry. ICE alleged that Karjabal, she wanted to go into the facility while ICE was raiding it. But ICE alleged that Karjabal was part of a group of violent protesters who tried to disrupt agents who were executing a search agent and then doxed one of the agents. So apparently an ICE member saw that she was a member of Congress and then gave her his card and said, you could contact me later and we'll brief you on the operation. So then the representative, Karjabal, took that card and then gave it to other violent protesters. Soros-backed prosecutor to release Colorado sex offender deemed unfit for trial. You might have heard about this. So this woman, so Solomon Callaghan is this black transsexual sex offender who has been in and out of trouble and jail. Even her relatives say that she can't stand trial because she's insane. Who was the name of the Miss Padden? Who was the name of this? Amy Padden, the district attorney, may face a recall because of this. So she received $40,000 in cash from Mr. Soros to win her district attorney election. And she also offered a sweetheart deal to a 15-year-old illegal immigrant who killed a woman in a high-speed crash last summer. So we don't have to go into Soros and all this other shit. Axios is reporting Resistance 2.0 protests get louder and more organized. Just going back to that other article, the Colorado sex offender is not standing trial because she's insane. She's transsexual. She's insane. And she tried to kidnap a 12-year-old boy. But she's getting out because she's insane. Axios, Resistance 2.0 protesters get louder and more organized, more from the CIA. Protests against the Trump administration policies and allies have attracted millions in the last few months. So, scheduled for July 17th, Good Trouble lives on. Whatever. Nearly 80 million Americans gave President Trump a historic mandate to make America great again. Right, they don't care about that. See, politics never used to be this way. When you won, you won. And the losers went home and planned for the next election. They don't go out and just protest the fact that someone else got elected that they don't like. New York Post, California professor arrested for allegedly tossing tear gas canister at ICE agents during raid on cannabis farm. Jonathan Anthony Carvello, a math and science professor at California State University, Channel Islands, throwing tear gas canister. Look at this guy. What a lunatic. Now, I have nothing against long hair or whatever. The guy just looks like a lunatic. That's your mugshot. You're making a big face. The fact that you're against law enforcement, that's what you pay taxes for. You know? And these people are here illegally. There's no doubt about the illegality, and there's no doubt about the right of federal law enforcement to correct the illegality, to enforce the law, and then you have to get in the way. Why? Because you don't believe in it? Fix the law. Wall Street Journal, Etsy witches charged for jobs, sunshine, and Knicks wins. Business is booming. Some spells promise love, success, and revenge. $25 for tax refund and a boyfriend. What's wrong with America? It's a free country. You could do whatever you want. You know, you want to be a witch, you could be a witch, I guess. But it's a moral degradation is what it is. Over. New York Post, 3 Democrats win double-digit support in early 2028 presidential primary poll with one clear frontrunner. You'll never guess who it's going to be. It's fucking Kamala Harris, who got 26% of the vote. Ugh, we're going to have to face this lunatic again. There was so much money invested in her, they want to get a dividend. So they're going to run her again. Whether she wins, I'm sure she's gone away. They take people, usually a better intellect. They take people, send them away for a year. They brush up their skills. So she'll come back as a robot, or like somebody with her face will come back. Buttigieg and Gavin Newsom finished second. Cory Booker, Alexandria Cortez third. And Mark Cuban and Jon Stewart, Stephen A. Smith third. Wall Street Journal, 40,000 troops, 19 nations. The China threat unites U.S. allies. The Talisman Sabre military drills in Australia will include missile tests. Well, great. Maybe we should stop giving fucking the NVIDIA AI cutting-edge technology chips to China that they use in their weaponry and their AI and what have you. Just the news, Trump says U.S. will be sending weapons to Ukraine, will be funded by NATO. At least we don't have to pay for it. And I understand what he's doing. You can't let Putin run roughshod. You give him a pass, and then he walks all over you. Fuck him. Hey, but I'm not a warmonger. You want to give defensive weapons to Ukraine or NATO, whatever. And you want to put sanctions on, but no war. And I know where this is going to lead, so. Zero hedge, NATO turning Moldova into cannon fodder to confront Russia, says the Kremlin. I agree. NATO is doing all it can to weaponize Romania specifically, but now Moldova also, because Moldova is kind of south of Ukraine along the Black Sea, and they're using that to blunt and to run weapons through into Ukraine, illegally, mind you. I'm not going to go through this text. China's 373 mile per hour maglev train debuts, slashing travel times between cities. You see, China, all the investment is going to China to make China modern and technologically connected. And I'm going to go into why in a second. It's not just maglev trains. That's a showpiece. China says its economy held up under Trump tariff attack. We reported on this at the outset of the episode today. Beijing reports second quarter GDP growth of 5.2 as exports continue to defy expectations. Right, because the tariffs really aren't in place. This should be a war, but Trump is trying to balance the manufacturing need of the United States that is already in China with a defense against China. NBC News, another Chinese AI model is turning heads. Alibaba-backed startup Moonshot released a late Friday night its Kimi K2 model, touting performance that rivals many U.S. models. Of course it does. Its real strength is writing computer code. That's what I'm saying. The whole thing is like, oh, you don't have a job anymore, write code. Well, that's gone too. And the thing is, oh, the AI model is better than America. Well, it's got the NVIDIA cutting-edge chip now. And of course, this is from Quartz. Kids are turning to AI for friendship. I don't have anyone else to talk to. A UK report reveals children are turning to chatbots for homework help, emotional advice, and sometimes because they have no one else. Even 64% of kids are using AI chatbots because they have no one else to talk to. Because they knew this. You isolate kids behind their computer, and then you give them AI chatbots that make you insane or turn you into a school shooter. Or, as the saying goes, going to turn you into a good communist. Or good Maoist, I should say. Washington Post, Big Brother gets new powers in China with digital ID system. You see what we're building with the new NVIDIA chip? China's long mastered, once considered impossible, completely controlling the internet within its borders. Tuesday, Beijing will take another step towards centralizing its power. over the web, introducing a government-run digital ID that will enable it to even more closely censor and surveil the country's 1 billion internet users. How about people around the world? That too? Real name registration. That's what people in this country, that's what Nikki Haley wanted in this country. The Chinese internet companies almost always know the true identity of users, who they are, say, ordering, address online, leaving a social media commenter. So they know who you are. And now with a centralized ID system, which is being developed in China, but it was going to be used internationally, mark my fucking word. That's what I said. The elite are pumping China with an economy and a system that they like, an authoritarian system, a technocracy that they like, that's going to be then expanded over the whole world, or at least very well melded with the West. Look at Wirecutter. I tried and failed to disappear from the internet. This is an article by Max Eddy. You can't do it. So the best thing he suggests you do is what I've done all along, is you limit the information about yourself that's connected to you as a user, and stop signing up for shit with your email address and your real name and shit. I mean, you have to do it for some things, but if you're shopping, most outlets will protect your identity, but your identity, your email address can be sold, and then it's recirculated online all the time. The best thing to do is to stay anonymous online, but we have China enabling a system that won't let you do that. So you can't cut yourself away. The best thing to do is don't betray yourself as yourself. Stop publishing personal details of you on vacation or interesting thing. Look at me, I built a cake for my birthday, or, you know. Stop it. Because they meant you to do this. You're building a profile on yourself, because then the Chinese can come up and know exactly who you are. All right, we're over. Yeah, I think we're over about 5 minutes. I think so. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the podcast. Remember, you're under attack, psychologically and biologically, from the internet. Yeah, we're over about 10 minutes. Sorry about that. So don't forget, every day, Monday through Friday, live streaming on Rumble. You can also check me out on YouTube, Substack, Getter Minds, True Social, X. Thanks for joining me today. Stay hip to the trick. And I'm not going to keep you any longer. No Tuesdays with Perry tonight. I got an emergency thing I got to deal with. So, but thanks for joining me today. I appreciate you. Respect. I kill you.